The winter of 1943 carried with it the bitter taste of defeat. Across the Atlantic, German soldiers captured in North Africa and Italy found themselves herded onto Liberty ships' steel giants that seemed endless compared to the cramped U-boats they had once admired in propaganda posters. For weeks. They crossed a gray ocean, the hum of engines drowning out thoughts of home. When the hatches opened at last, it wasn't the ruined ports of France or the bomb-cratered landscapes of Europe that greeted them, but the overwhelming brightness of an American harbor. New York, Boston, Norfolk, names they had whispered in fear during the war, now materialized before their stunned eyes. The prisoners expected hunger, barbed wire, and humiliation. Instead, they were astonished by a sight they had not seen since 1939, neon signs still blazing at night. Berlin had gone dark years earlier, its electricity rationed to the bones. Yet here, skyscrapers stood illuminated like towers of defiance. A young lieutenant named Hans Bäumer, who had once believed in Hitler's thousand-year Reich, scribbled in his diary that the lights of Manhattan seemed brighter than daylight itself, a city untouched by war, as if in mockery of Europe's ruins. From the harbors, trains carried them deep into the heartland. The railcars were not cattle wagons, but passenger coaches, with padded seats, warm stoves, and windows that revealed landscapes few had imagined. Miles of wheat, corn, and cattle fields stretched further than the horizon itself. When the trains paused, children on platforms sometimes waved, curious rather than hostile. Upon arrival at the camps Texas, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Georgia, they discovered rows of wooden barracks set against open skies. The barbed wire was real, but so too were the barrack stoves, stacked food stores, and parcels of supplies. A sergeant named Wilhelm Kruger wrote in disbelief, "It was captivity. Yes, but there was bread without ration cards, meat without stamps, and milk brought fresh each morning. They even gave us soap of a quality our wives at home would have envied." What lingered most, however, wasn't the bread or the lights. It was a ritual almost absurd in its generosity: the cigarettes. On their very first evening, a guard appeared at the barracks door with cartons. He opened them casually, as if distributing nothing more precious than nails. Inside were Lucky Strike's bright green packets, their bold red circles stamped with a confidence that mirrored the very nation. The prisoners expected harsh scraps of tobacco rolled thin, like those they had smoked in North Africa when supplies ran dry. Instead, each man was handed a full pack, 20 cigarettes, pristine and fragrant. Some stared, reluctant to believe they weren't being mocked. Cigarettes in Germany had become a form of currency. A single pack could be traded for bread, even for favors. Here, they were handed out as though they meant nothing. Hans Bäumer described the moment in his diary. "I turned the packet over in my hands. It smelled rich, almost sweet, stronger than the bitter smoke of our field rations, heavier than the Turkish blends we once prized. I lit one, inhaled, and felt my lungs burn as if I had swallowed fire itself. The others coughed and laughed, but I thought this cigarette is stronger than war." That first puff was more than a taste of tobacco. It was an introduction to an industrial world they had underestimated. To produce cigarettes of this quality in such abundance required farms larger than provinces, machines that rolled thousands per minute, warehouses filled with mountains of cured leaves. The smoke itself seemed a reminder America's strength was not in ideology or terror, but in resources and production so vast that even prisoners of war could share in its surplus. The men exhaled into the night air, the glowing tips of their Lucky Strikes flaring like silent red beacons against the darkness of the Texas plains. Behind the wire, they no longer felt like conquerors or captives, only small men witnessing the scale of something far greater. And yet, as the smoke drifted upward, one question lingered unspoken among them: if America could give cigarettes to its enemies, what else could it give to itself? The first drag of a Lucky Strike was not merely a taste, it was an intrusion. For men accustomed to the thin, acrid bite of ersatz tobacco, the American cigarette landed in the chest like a hammer. Hans Bäumer coughed so hard he dropped the match. Others, more seasoned, tried to mask their surprise, but their eyes watered. The smoke was dense, perfumed, and relentless. It clung to the lungs and the fabric of their uniforms. In Germany, a cigarette was rationed, bartered, and fought over. A single roll-up with black market tobacco could cost a week's wages. Here, in the first week of captivity, each man received a daily ration of 2 packs 40 cigarettes. According to U.S. Army Quartermaster records, over 280 million packs were distributed to POWs between 1943 and 1946. The numbers defied logic in a nation at war. America supplied its captives with more tobacco than many German cities saw in a year. The Germans looked at one another in disbelief. The front had taken everything boots worn to nothing, soup thinned with sawdust, paper cigarettes that burned in seconds. Yet behind barbed wire, the smoke was rich, steady, almost luxurious. Cigarettes inside the camps quickly replaced money. A pack of Lucky Strikes could buy extra bread, socks, or even secret favors from fellow prisoners. The guards knew it too, often tossing packs as casually as one might feed birds. Some prisoners hoarded them, stacking cartons under their bunks like treasure. Others smoked incessantly, filling the barracks with a haze so thick it seemed like a fog had settled indoors. Wilhelm Kruger, the pragmatic sergeant, treated his ration like a banker. He cut deals, exchanged packs for sharpened tools in the workshop, for letters smuggled to civilian families, even for sketches of American landscapes drawn by fellow POWs. Lucky Strikes, he wrote, are more powerful than the Reichsmark, stronger than gold, because here, they buy the taste of freedom. And yet, beneath the trades and the laughter, something deeper stirred. The prisoners realized that what was scarce in Germany was abundant here. Every puff was a reminder of imbalance, of a world where scarcity was not natural, but manufactured by ideology and defeat. The cigarettes carried more than nicotine. They carried the scent of a machine age. The paper was crisp, the filters cut evenly, the tobacco golden brown without stem or dust. Each one looked identical, as though born in perfect order. This precision revealed something no speech or statistic could America's capacity to standardize luxury. In Germany, factories built tanks and planes, yet could not clothe their workers properly or feed their families. Here, industry rolled endless cigarettes, shipped them across oceans, and placed them in the hands of captured enemies without hesitation. One POW remarked bitterly, "If they can waste such quality on us, what do they give to their own?" The question hung heavy. Inhaling the smoke meant inhaling proof that the Reich's promises of superiority had been hollow. At night, when the barracks fell quiet, the glow of dozens of cigarettes illuminated tired faces. Smoke curled to the rafters, carrying with it whispered doubts. If this is captivity? One man muttered, "What does freedom here look like?" The cigarettes became both comfort and torment. Comfort, because the act of smoking gave rhythm to days otherwise marked by monotony. Torment, because each puff widened the chasm between what they had believed and what they now saw. Hans Bäumer recorded one last thought before extinguishing his cigarette on the wooden floor. It burned longer than our lies, stronger than our speeches. In that smoke, I tasted not just tobacco, but defeat. And the men knew what they would encounter next would not just be stronger than war, but larger than any empire they had once pledged themselves to. Morning roll calls soon turned into work assignments. The POWs, restless in confinement, were sent out under guard to harvest cotton, repair fences, or load crates. One afternoon, a group from Camp Swift in Texas was transported to a nearby town for labor. As their truck passed a sprawling brick complex, they stared in silence at tobacco factory. The building stretched for blocks, its tall chimneys releasing thin streams of smoke into the sky. Painted across its walls in bold white letters was a logo they now recognized intimately: Lucky Strike. What had seemed like mere paper packets the night before was revealed as the product of an empire of machines. Conveyor belts rattled, boxcars waited on sidings, and endless rows of workers moved with the rhythm of practiced efficiency. It was industry not hidden in shadows, but displayed openly, proudly. The guards pointed with casual pride. "That's where your smokes come from." Hans Bäumer's diary captured the moment I had thought these cigarettes were magic, conjured out of thin air. But here stood a fortress of industry, producing millions daily. The sight filled me with awe and despair. Our Reich had its weapons factories, yes, but they were targets for bombers, buried in forests, hidden in caves. Here, America built its strength in plain view. The figures were staggering. Company records from the American Tobacco Company showed that in 1944 alone, Lucky Strike factories produced over 140 billion cigarettes. To put that into perspective, enough for every man, woman, and soldier in the United States to smoke more than a pack a day. One factory in Richmond consumed more electricity in a month than the entire city of Cologne. Machines rolled 200 cigarettes per minute, each flawless, each identical. The Germans were used to improvisation, cutting paper by hand, filling it with shreds of beet leaves or oak bark when tobacco ran out, watching box after box leave the factory by the ton. They realized they were looking at a nation where luxury was industrialized. If America could mass-produce pleasure at such scale, what did that say of its power to mass-produce war? Kruger, the pragmatic sergeant, managed to slip a note into a Red Cross envelope. He wrote cautiously, knowing censors would read every word, "We are treated not with cruelty, but with an excess of resources. Even cigarettes, finer than any I smoked at home, are given freely. It is as if they do not notice the cost. Tell this to our neighbors. If you dare, we are fed and smoked better as captives than as soldiers." Others echoed the same shock. In one diary later recovered from Camp Aliceville, a POW confessed, "We thought America a hollow land of jazz and skyscrapers, but the cigarette between my fingers tells another story. They conquer not by the sword, but by production. Even their smoke has power." Every cigarette became a comparison. Cologne, Hamburg, Dresden, all were scarred by bombing. Their factories silent, their chimneys collapsed. The men thought of wives waiting in queues for thin bread, of mothers sewing ration coupons into envelopes. Against that memory stood the endless flow of American industry trains of tobacco, fields of cotton, factories that thundered like drums of permanence. Hans closed his notebook one night and whispered to Kruger, "If they can make this much smoke, imagine how many planes, how many bombs, how many tanks they can make." Kruger did not answer. He only lit another Lucky Strike and let the silence speak louder than words. What the men could not yet see was that cigarettes were just the beginning. The factories of America did not stop at tobacco. Steel, rubber, oil, and food poured out in volumes that would soon make even the richest cigarette look like a trifle. And the Germans, powerless to deny it, knew they were about to learn how small their world had truly been. By late 1944, the rhythm of camp life had settled. Work details in the morning, food in the mess hall, evenings marked by smoke drifting above the barracks. Yet what gave historians the clearest window into these men's minds were the letters and diaries they left behind. For prisoners, writing was both survival and betrayal survival, because it allowed them to process disbelief, betrayal, because every page confessed how far their expectations had fallen. Hans Boehmer, once proud lieutenant, described his thoughts with precision. The Lucky Strike's taste of honey and fire. They arrive by the carton, as though the enemy has no end to his generosity. Each puff reminds me of what we lack, of how hollow our claims of superiority sound now. Is it possible our Führer lied, not about small things, but about everything? The American censors let many of these words pass, perhaps understanding that disbelief was its own kind of re-education. For the guards, the cigarettes were routine. Quartermaster trucks unloaded them by the crate, distributed them like rations of bread. To the prisoners, they were proof of something deeper than comfort. Wilhelm Kruger, who had turned cigarette trading into an art, wrote in his journal, "No bomb, no tank, no artillery piece has the power these cartons hold. They strike without sound, forcing us to question, to compare, to doubt." A Lucky Strike is stronger than propaganda, stronger than fear. The irony was not lost. The same tobacco companies that fueled American soldiers at the front were also fueling the disintegration of German certainty behind barbed wire. Smoke became an invisible weapon, reshaping convictions with each breath. At night, when lamps were dimmed, the men whispered. Some still clung to the dream of a German victory, insisting these luxuries were a trap meant to soften them. Others admitted quietly that the war was already lost. Cigarettes became symbols in these arguments. No nation that can give its prisoners this much can be beaten. One corporal murmured, another spat back. "It is poison, nothing more." But even he smoked until his fingers yellowed. The disagreements were not about taste, but about truth. If America could afford such waste, what did that mean about Germany's future? The smoke filling the room was more than haze. It was doubt solidified into air. Some POWs captured their confusion in sketches and notes, later archived in Germany. One drawing from Camp Tonkawa showed a carton of Lucky Strikes drawn like a fortress, guarded not by soldiers, but by endless trains of supply. Another diary entry compared the burn of the cigarette to the fall of cities. It lasts longer than our defenses. It burns steadier than Hamburg did. These writings were never meant as propaganda. They were intimate confessions, records of men trying to reconcile two realities, the one they had been taught to believe and the one they now lived. When Christmas 1944 arrived, the guards handed out not just turkey dinners, but also extra cartons of Lucky Strikes. It was a gesture of goodwill, but it landed like a blow. Some men laughed bitterly, others smoked in silence. Boehmer closed his diary that night with a line almost too painful to admit. The Reich told us we were the chosen, destined to rule. But here, as captives, we are treated with more care, more plenty than our people at home. If this is defeat, then perhaps defeat is truth. The smoke of those Lucky Strikes drifted into rafters heavy with contradiction. What had begun as comfort was becoming revelation, and still, deeper shocks awaited them, shocks measured not in cigarettes, but in fields, factories, and the generosity of strangers. By 1945, the ritual of smoking had become more than a pastime. It became a bridge. The guards, many no older than the prisoners they watched, lit the same Lucky Strikes during breaks. There was no ceremony to it, no fanfare, just the click of a lighter, the flicker of flame, and two men, once enemies, sharing the same smoke. The barbed wire remained, the rifles slung on shoulders, but the line between captive and captor blurred each time a cigarette passed from one hand to another. Hans Boehmer described one such moment. The guard offered me a light, for a moment. There was no war, no Reich, no barbed wire, only two men inhaling from the same fire. I realized then how fragile the walls between us truly were. Few words were exchanged, yet much was understood. A nod, a smile, a puff of smoke. It was a language more powerful than the slogans painted on camp fences. For German prisoners, Lucky Strikes were not simply American cigarettes. They were tokens of a strange equality. For the guards, they were nothing special, just another ration. The contrast cut deep. Wilhelm Kruger wrote of a guard named Tom, a farm boy from Iowa. He smokes the same cigarette I do. His country sends him a carton without effort. Mine sends my wife a ration card. Between us stands not ideology, but the number of cigarettes we can afford to waste. There were moments when the smoke lifted the weight of captivity, during work details on farms. American farmers sometimes offered POWs cigarettes from their own packs. The Germans would hesitate, suspicious at first, but when they inhaled, the barrier cracked. Farmers and prisoners would lean against the same fence, exhaling clouds into the same wind. The silence said what words could not: hunger, exhaustion, and longing were not uniquely German or American. For some, these encounters were disorienting. If the enemy could offer a cigarette without malice, perhaps he was not truly the monster propaganda had painted. This was not forgiveness, but recognition that beyond uniforms and borders, men were more alike than different. And yet, every cigarette also reminded the POWs of the abyss between the two worlds. For an American soldier, smoking a Lucky Strike was routine. For a German, it was a revelation. Each puff widened the chasm of comparison. If guards smoked as casually as they breathed, how could the Reich have claimed superiority? One evening, Kruger watched a guard light his cigarette with a Zippo lighter, its metal gleaming in the dusk. The flame snapped alive with a simple flick. Kruger later wrote, "Even their fire is engineered. Our men used matches that broke in the wind. Theirs carry flame in steel cases. What kind of nation builds machines not only for war, but for fire itself?" These fragile connections did not erase captivity. Barbed wire still cut into the horizon. Rifles still patrolled the perimeter. Yet in the small rituals of smoking, men glimpsed another reality. They could no longer fully believe the Reich's words about America's weakness. The smoke revealed a different kind of power, not the terror of bombs, but the quiet authority of plenty. In the final months of war, as news of German defeats trickled in, these cigarettes became anchors. They reminded the prisoners that survival was possible, that beyond the rubble of their homeland existed a world where even enemies could share fire. But with every shared puff came a deeper question, one none dared answer aloud. If smoke could bridge enemies, what else could it erase? By the spring of 1945, the smoke hung heavier than ever, not because of tobacco alone, but because of the collapse of everything the prisoners had once believed. Rumors of Germany's defeats arrived through newspapers, guards' conversations, or Red Cross reports. Stalingrad had already shattered faith in invincibility. Now Dresden lay in ashes. The Ruhr collapsed, Berlin under siege, inside the camps. The prisoners clutched Lucky Strikes as though the cigarettes themselves had become a clock counting down the end of their Reich. Hans Boehmer recorded the change in a diary entry smuggled out of Camp Aliceville. When the guard handed me my ration today, I no longer thought of the smoke, but of the factories that made it. If they can send us this luxury while waging war across oceans, then our leaders lied about everything. Cigarettes here are not indulgence, they are judgment. The numbers were undeniable. In 1945, the U.S. War Department reported distributing more than 45 billion cigarettes to soldiers and POWs combined. Entire divisions measured their days not in rations of bread, but in cartons of Lucky Strikes. A German prisoner calculated bitterly that the average American soldier smoked more in a week than his family in Cologne could in a year. The comparison was not lost. A single American tobacco warehouse held more surplus than all the occupied territories combined. For the Germans, every puff was proof of the abyss. Scarcity at home had been explained as necessity, sacrifice for the fatherland, yet here, captivity was abundance. At night, the talk turned darker. Kruger admitted openly, "The Reich is finished. If they can waste so much smoke on us, they can waste tanks on the front." Younger soldiers resisted, insisting Germany would rise again, that secret weapons would turn the tide. But even they smoked without pause, unable to deny the luxury in their hands. One corporal, once a devout believer, threw his half-burned cigarette into the dirt and muttered, "Stronger than war, stronger than faith. This smoke has beaten us." No one contradicted him. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the camps erupted not in celebration, but in silence. Men lit cigarettes, drew deeply, and stared at the horizon. The Lucky Strikes now tasted different, not like fire, but like endings. They had entered captivity as soldiers of a conquering Reich. They emerged as men who knew they had been deceived, undone not only by bombs and bullets, but by the quiet weight of industrial truth. Hans closed his final diary with a line that historians would later quote again and again. "We smoked our defeat one cigarette at a time." The cartons did not stop after the war ended. Cigarettes became currency in post-war Europe, Lucky Strikes especially, traded for bread, coal, and favors. German POWs repatriated with pockets full of them, carrying home not just smoke, but memories of a nation whose abundance had exposed the lies of their own. The ashes left behind were not only from tobacco, they were the ashes of certainty, burned away by every puff, every shared light, every moment of doubt that grew into truth. And yet, as the men exhaled under American skies for the last time, one question lingered. Soft as the smoke itself, had they truly been defeated by armies, or by abundance?